Welcome back to Smitty's Learning Room. Today we continue to have a look at the learning environment, and we're looking at the concept of feedback. Now when we have a look at the syllabus and we have a look at the concept of whereabouts does feedback come from, we know that it comes from the focus question, how does the acquisition of skill affect performance? And when we come down to the learnabouts, we look to the learning environment, and right down the bottom, the feedback. So the sorts of things we'll have a look at in this video are internal and external feedback, concurrent and delayed feedback, and knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. So when we have a look at the concept of feedback, we think about these ideas or quotes that you might have heard before, such as practice makes perfect or perfect practice makes perfect. And when we have a look at these things, we sort of say, well, if we're consistently practicing, but we're practicing the wrong thing, does that mean that our performance is going to be performed well? Or if we're consistently practicing the perfect thing or the right thing, we are going to have consistently good performance? And it's probably more of a case of the latter. And this is where feedback is so important, because we can't have this perfect practice if we don't have feedback provided to us in order to make changes to our routines and performances to ensure that we're performing it the best we can. So we start by having a look at the types of feedback. And we have types of feedback, which is having a look at knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. Then we have sources of feedback, so internal sources or external sources. And then we have the timing of feedback. So is the timing of the feedback concurrent or is it delayed? And we'll have a look at these 6 different types of feedback throughout the video. So we start by having a look at the types of feedback, and we look at knowledge of results. And this type of feedback provides information about the outcome of a movement. And it generally occurs at the conclusion of the performance from external sources such as judges, coaches, or videos of the performance that has just happened. Now, all learners will use this type of feedback, but it's most commonly used amongst the cognitive learners because they're going to receive feedback after they have performed something from their coach. And this may be because they personally cannot source feedback from themselves. They need someone or results to show them how well they performed. The next type of feedback is knowledge of performance. Now, this type of feedback provides information about the patterns of movement in a performance. And knowledge of performance are sourced internally from a kinetic sense and also from external sources such as a coach or a video analysis. And the knowledge of performance can be received during the performance, so that's concurrent, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, or after the performance, so delayed, and again we'll talk about that later too. Now, autonomous learners use this type of feedback the most effectively because they're able to take feedback from the performance, both internally and externally, to enhance their performance. So when we look at the if an athlete sources knowledge of performance internally, they're actually able to make adaptations during their performance to enhance their score, and that's at an autonomous stage, whereas if a learner at the cognitive stage will actually be waiting after the performance for feedback from external sources such as their coach, and by then it's too late because the performance may already be judged. So now we have a look at the sources of feedback, and we look at internal and external sources. Now these are sorts of words that we've seen quite a bit in this core, internal and external. So obviously internal feedback is a type of feedback which comes from the athlete and can vary from self-talk to a kinetic sense. Now, athletes at the associative stage and the autonomous stage are more likely to use this type of feedback to enhance their performance because they've got a greater understanding of what is expected and what their body can do. So they'll use that kinetic sense to make adaptations to their performance. For example, if they're doing a dive and they dive off the diving board and their takeoff isn't as well as they had wished, they can actually then make adaptations to their performance midway through the performance. Whereas if someone at a cognitive stage of learning would not be able to identify that the takeoff was not done properly and therefore would not receive feedback until after their performance, they wouldn't receive it from an internal source. So then we look at external sources of feedback, and this type of feedback is sourced from coaches, videos, judges, and scoreboards. Now, learners at all stages will receive external feedback. However, those at a cognitive stage will use for encouragement and motivation. So, for example, feedback from a coach or a judge or a scoreboard, which is external for a learner at the cognitive stage, will provide them with motivation to try and do better next time, or will also be good to encourage them to continue to improve. Now, learners at the associative and the autonomous stage who use external feedback to improve performance. So instead of using it as a motivation like the cognitive stage does, they will take away that feedback which has come from external sources and apply that to their performance and work out how they can perform better next time. So finally, we have a look at the timing of feedback, and we look at concurrent and delayed feedback. Now, concurrent, and just remember with this, is that concurrent can be split up into con and current. So current being right now. And this feedback is received during the performance and can be combined with other types of feedback. So, for example, internal concurrent, and an example of internal concurrent feedback would be a kinesinetic sense. And so it's important for athletes to be able to understand when feedback is given, or the timing of that feedback, because that could also identify their stages of learning that they're at. Once a learner starts to use concurrent feedback within their performance, that may show that they're moving from a cognitive to an associative stage of learning. And then finally, we'll look at delayed feedback. So really obvious, this type of feedback is received after the performance or after a skill has been executed. And this is usually around the knowledge of results and external feedback. And obviously, delayed feedback is used by all athletes at each stage of learning. However, those at the associative or the autonomous stage of learning are more likely to actually use and implement the delayed feedback to improve their performance. For learning purposes, it's really important to have a look at the different types of feedback. So types of feedback, sources of feedback, and timing of feedback, and that this feedback can be applied as soon as possible. So for example, if learners are practicing or executing new skills in training, it's really important for coaches to give feedback during that training session, and then also allow them time to practice again to apply that feedback. And the same thing, say after a game, it's important to have a session where athletes can ask questions to talk about the feedback that the coach has given them, but also for the coach to then perhaps develop training sessions which are based around the feedback that they've provided after the game.